policy, frameworks, and tools to address challenges and complexities of managing sustainable land use in relation to climate change and food security in the region. These regional policy frameworks and tools have contributed to distilling global, regional, and national best practices and bringing forward the ASEAN agenda at the intersections between food, agriculture, and forestry and climate change. They serve as a reference for policymakers and practitioners in the region when developing and implementing national policies and programs in these areas. Since its establishment in 2014, led by Thailand, the ASEAN Climate Resilience Network, or ASEAN-CRN, continues to be a platform to regional exchange, particularly for sharing information, experiences, and expertise on climate-smart agricultural practices and fostering collaboration. In close coordination with the ASEAN Technical Working Group on Agricultural Research and Development, or ATWGARD, and with support from development partners and experts, ASEAN-CRN has facilitated the development of several key policy and technical documents in this context, which have been endorsed by the Senior Officials Meeting of the ASEAN Ministers on Agriculture and Forestry, or SOM-AMAF. In 2015 and 2017, the ASEAN-CRN and partners have developed 2 volumes of the ASEAN Regional Guidelines for promoting CSA practices. The purpose of the existing 2 volumes is to promote the scaling up and scaling out of climate-smart agricultural practices and policies throughout the ASEAN region. Since then, there have been numerous developments related to agricultural technologies and approaches, but also in terms of policy and wider societal context. The international community is currently discussing intensely about sustainable food systems and the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on agricultural value.
Please also allow me to welcome Dr. Pham Quang Min, who is the Assistant Director of Food, Agriculture and Forestry of the ASEAN Secretariat, and he also would like to welcome you to this workshop.
Thank you, Hannah. So I would like first of all, from your good office and knowledge, and we can then also develop the volume 3. I just wish to highlight that volume 3 is one of the important documents for ASEAN, right? Because if you look at the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework, right, so we also consider this is one of the important activity for the recoveries to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, right? And when I recall that when we developed the implementation framework for the recovery framework, right? Comprehensive recovery framework, we also consider that sustainable agriculture and the implementation of climate smart agriculture is very important for the recovery areas. So with the support from the climate smart land use projects and different partners from GIZ, from SERPCAS, we are now here to discuss about the volume 3 of the climate smart agriculture volume 3, right? And I hope that we have fruitful discussions. And again, I'd like to thank all of you for joining this meeting, right? And I wish you all the good discussion and the good. After the workshop, I also wish you can give us information, experience, and contribution to the development of the volume 3 of climate smart agriculture. Once again, I'd like to thank all of you, and I wish you take care and stay safe during the pandemic, and I hope to see you in person soon. Thank you. Back to you, Hannah.
Thank you, Dr. Min. Yes, I can also echo that. I wish we could all see each other in person soon, but I'm also very glad that these kinds of virtual platforms exist and also allow us to come together in such high numbers. So still the list of participants seems to be increasing. So welcome to everyone who has just joined in the past few minutes. Next slide, please. I would like to give a very brief intro to our technical platform and some housekeeping rules. So obviously, since we are quite a lot of people in this meeting, please keep your microphone muted unless you want to speak. If you want to speak, please, there are two ways to indicate that. So please use the raise hand sign that you can see in the upper right corner of your screen. Or you can also use the chat box, and you can see the speech bubble you can click up on in order to open this chat box, and then there is a little field for typing in your messages in the lower right corner of your screen. So please feel free to at any time during the presentations use the chat box to leave your comments or already indicate your questions so that we can pick them up later on after the presentations. But also, as I said, you can also use the raise hand function, and then we will call you out after the inputs and during the discussion rounds. Of course, you can also see the mute and or the microphone symbol that you can click to mute and unmute yourself, also in the upper right bar of your screen. And also, we are very happy if we can see your faces when you talk, and especially when we do the group picture. So you can also turn on and off your camera in the menu of our Microsoft Teams platform. So next slide, please. Please note that this meeting is being recorded. So by staying in this meeting, by joining this meeting and continuing to be here, you are giving the consent for this meeting to be recorded with you in it. We plan to share the recording with other stakeholders in the regions, again, through the sectoral bodies of ASEAN, in order to invite other representatives who might not be able to join this meeting today also to provide comments and thoughts and follow the discussion. So please take note of that. Next slide, please. So this is our today's agenda. The meeting will run until approximately 1 p.m. Bangkok, Jakarta time. After our opening, in which we are just doing right now, we will have 3 input presentations by experts from CIRCA. I will introduce them to you in a few minutes, but we will of course also have sufficient time for discussions. We will start with a reflection about the existing ASEAN CSA guidelines, volume 1 and 2. We will reflect about their development process and about how they are being implemented in ASEAN member states. And we will have a round of discussions about these topics after the first presentation. Then we will have some updates about evolution and the emergence of shocks and stresses related to climate change in Southeast Asia, as this is, of course, an important information for planning CSA practices. We will have short breaks and a group photo, and then move on to the third presentation, where we discuss about proposed strategies for CSA promotion and implementation. After a short open forum where you can pose questions and make comments to the presentations that you have heard, we will move on to our breakout sessions, where we then discuss in more details about your views and experiences with CSA. Then we'll have like a medium-term break of about 15 to 20 minutes that hopefully will give you a little bit of time to refresh, grab a snack, a coffee, go for prayers, and hopefully we'll see you back afterwards, where we then will share the results of the breakout sessions and will also give you an overview of how the process of developing the Volume 3 and the implementation framework will look like in the next few months. So this is the agenda for today. Next slide, please. As Dr. Min and Dr. Shukri already summarized extremely comprehensively, I just wanted to give a reminder of where we are starting from and what we want to produce, but I will be very short. Here you see the covers of the ASEAN CSA Guidelines Volume 1. Volume 1 has been published in 2015 and Volume 2 in 2017. Both have been developed through the ASEAN Climate Resilience Network and have been endorsed by ATWGARD. They have been disseminated and used in the region since a couple of years, but as we heard in our welcoming remarks, obviously we are developing further, technologies are developing, experience are being made, and also the situation is changing and also concepts are evolving. So we want to reflect about this by developing two outputs. The Volume 3, which will include additional strategies and practices related to climate smart agriculture. And additionally, complementing, there is the plan to develop another document, or in addition to the Volumes 3, we need to see in what way it will take shape in the end, that will summarize principles, recommendations on a more aggregated level of how CSA in general, irrespective of the individual practice, can be promoted, how implementation can be upscaled in the individual ASEAN member states. So these are the two outputs that we would like to produce through this process. And this whole process will be interlinked with a number of technical events that will be hosted by ASEAN-CRN throughout this year. And these events will both inform this process of developing the CSA guidelines, but they will also take out information that will emerge through this process and use it disseminated through these technical events and dialogues. And we will invite stakeholders to join these events, again, through the network of ASEAN-CRN and of course through the ASEAN sectoral bodies. So this is just a brief summary of the outputs that we would like to achieve in this process. And I will give an outlook about the process at the end of this meeting. So with this and without further ado, I would like to hand over to Dr. Romeo Labius. Dr. Romeo Labius is an operations consultant of CIRCA. Prior to joining CIRCA in February 2020, he served as a scientist and agronomist at the International Rice Research Institute IRRI based in Myanmar, and he led the implementation of several IRRI projects starting from 2007 onwards. Prior to joining IRRI, Dr. Labius was a university researcher and affiliate faculty at the Agricultural Systems Institute, College of Agriculture, University of Philippines at Los Baños from 1980 to 2014. Dr. Labius is one of the national partners that contributed to the development of the CSA Guidelines Volume 1. Dr. Labius obtained his PhD and his master's degree in agronomy from the Iowa State University in the USA, and prior to that, he did his bachelor's in agriculture at the Central Luzon State University in the Philippines. So, Dr. Labius, please start with your first presentation.
Thank you, Hannah, for that kind introduction. Good morning to everyone. Let me upload my presentation. So good morning to everyone. I can see in the list of participants some familiar names, and glad to see them here again. So this morning I will be presenting this review of ASEAN guidelines on climate smart agriculture, particularly these volumes 1 and 2. So the ASEAN has currently 2 CSA guidelines, as I mentioned, volume 1 and 2, which was published in 2015, volume 1, and 2017, volume 2. So the first volume of the CSA guidelines was part of the objectives and outcomes of the creation of ASEAN Climate Resilient Network, or ASEAN-CRN, which in itself was a result of a process initiated by Thailand with its proposal on production system approach for sustainable productivity and enhanced resilience to climate change to the ASEAN Technical Working Group, or ATWGARD, in 2013. At the national level, the ASEAN-CRN coordinated the assessments and studies in assessing climate change impacts on agricultural value chains with high relevance for food security and identifying existing CSA practices in crop production systems of rice and maize or cassava among the collaborating ASEAN member states such as Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, PDR, Myanmar, Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, and 2 participating AMS, Brunei Darussalam, and Malaysia. This slide just shows the summary of CSA practices identified in the national studies. And as mentioned earlier, the ASEAN-CRN coordinated the national studies that assessed climate change impacts on agriculture and rural development, and 2, identified existing CSA practices across rice, maize, and cassava. From these national assessments and studies, 5 CSA practices were selected by ASEAN-CRN and ATWGARD as priority good CSA practices to scale up in the region via ASEAN-CRN. And these are stress-tolerant rice varieties, stress-tolerant maize varieties, agro-insurance using weather indices, alternate wetting and drying, cropping calendar for rice and maize. In CSA Volume 1, each of these practices was discussed in terms of their technical descriptions, synthesis of technical issues, institutional and technical challenges, regional cooperations, and mechanisms to address the implementations of such practices. It should also be noted that CSA Volume 1 include the regional cooperation on scaling up climate-smart agriculture practices. To formalize regional cooperation on scaling up CSA practices and strengthening the capacity of AMS, respectively. CSA Volume 1 was formally endorsed through AMAF in 2015. It was also noted that in the development of Volume 1, there are challenges faced for scaling up CSA practices, namely lack of effective approaches for the transfer of CSA technology and knowledge through agricultural extension programs, limited field demonstrations and piloting of CSA practices in selected areas, sharing and dissemination of CSA-related data and information, as well as transfer of technology within and among AMS, implementation of effective regional networking and collaborations for research and development activities and projects, availability of effective, efficient, accessible, and affordable climate risk management measures such as risk sharing or transfers through agri-insurance, and finally, a sustainable finance mechanisms for scaling up CSA practices. For Volume 2, it was officially published and endorsed in 2017. It covered additional 4 practices for promoting climate resilience in ASEAN, namely agricultural insurance, integrated farming systems, climate services, and rice shrimp farming. In the document, each practice was described in terms of how it can be effectively designed and implemented, as well as the current status in ASEAN is also presented. These 4 new CSA practices were identified by ASEAN-CRN based on the studies on promotion of climate resilience for food security in ASEAN, in addition to the learnings obtained from major ASEAN-CRN regional events from 2015 to 2017. For example, the Knowledge Exchange event, use of climate information services in agriculture in ASEAN, which was held in March 2017 at Cebu City, Philippines. It is important to note that Volume 2 regards itself as an update and complement to the first volume by focusing on the technical aspects of prioritized CSA practices as well as practice-specific regional collaboration agreements. In 2020, the Climate Smart Land Use in ASEAN, or CSLU, a project funded by the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development and GIZ, in close cooperation with the ASEAN Secretariat, conducted and published a review of ASEAN guidelines for climate smart land use practices. Specifically, that review focused on regional guidelines promoted and or co-developed by ASEAN-CRN, highlighting the CSA guidelines volumes 1 and 2, and compared with other guidelines such as the crop insurance guidelines published in 2016, public-private partnership guidelines published in 2017, responsible agricultural investment guidelines published in 2018, and the gender mainstreaming guidelines published in 2018. In a nutshell, the review analyzed and scoped the following: content and style, drafting and development process, dissemination and awareness raising, and implementation and monitoring of the CSA guidelines. In terms of the highlights of the review on its content and style, it was noted that the guidelines aim to serve as a tool for knowledge exchange. Volume 1 was seen as a benchmark to AMS in developing specific CSA practices, while Volume 2 was a showcase of impacts and how to guide for stakeholder involvement of the practices. The review also highlighted the role of ASEAN-CRN in collecting voluntary contributions from existing relevant CSA initiatives that were happening in the Southeast Asia at that time. Hence, the CSA guidelines were made up of best practices deemed important enough for AMS to be endorsed at the ministerial level. It took at least 1 year for the AMS to approve each of the guidelines. The review also identified that the dissemination and awareness raising of the CSA guidelines were mostly done through the productions of their hard copies and distribution of this at regional and international meetings, workshops, and conferences. In addition, that e-copy were uploaded in the ASEAN-CRN website. The review noted, however, that there were no measures done to trace the use and adoption of these documents. The review synthesized that since the CSA guidelines were developed as more of a compilation and a reference point for AMS who were seeking guidance on their implementation, these guidelines were meant to be a general reference for specific issues. The review identified how these guidelines are typically referred to when AMS is developing their sectoral master plans to harmonize with ASEAN commitments. Based on this analysis of the content and experiences with the CSA's volumes 1 and 2, the review came out with 8 key recommendations. Our team assessed each in terms of the development process, outputs, and adoption rollout of the guidelines, which we hope we could address for the CSA Volume 3. We will go through each of these recommendations on details later, but this slide shows you the 3 recommendations for strengthening the development process of CSA guidelines, or how the guidelines were developed. This slide shows you the 3 recommendations for improving the outputs of CSA guidelines development process, or what the contents of the guidelines are. And this slide shows you the recommendations for enhancing adoption or rollout of the outputs of CSA guidelines development, or how the guidelines were implemented. Again, we will discuss this in detail in the upcoming slides. To recap, CSA Volume 1 was endorsed in 2015, containing 5 CSA practices, while CSA Volume 2 was published in 2017 with additional 4 CSA practices. In 2020, GIZ conducted a review of these guidelines and came out with 8 recommendations to improve the process of CSA guidelines development, the outputs from such development process, and the adoption rollout of these outputs. In the next slides, we will discuss further each of the slides' recommendations from the review and the take-up points for the development of the next CSA volume. This figure is an illustration of the summary of the experiences of ASEAN-CRN in crafting the CSA guidelines. It begins with the ASEAN Minister States, or AMS, working with ASEAN-CRN in co-developing the guidelines, which is then forwarded to the ASEAN Technical Working Group in Agriculture and Rural Development, or ATWGARD, which in turn endorses to the ASEAN Ministers of Agriculture and Forestry for approval. Once approved, it goes back to be communicated and implemented with the AMS. Based on this process of developing CSA guidelines in the past, the review noted in their recommendations that it is important to ask the following questions. Are the guidelines the most effective policy tool for the intended outcomes? What are the innovations and intended use of any new guidelines among AMS and ASEC? How do we enable a system or a system-wide reflection on the use of the guidelines at the ASEC level? The CSA guidelines on CSA Volume 1 and 3 and 2 were 73 and 62 pages respectively. The review noted that there is a need to improve the accessibility, readability, and legibility of the guidelines to attract more users, especially the policymakers from the region. For this cycle of the CSA guidelines, development process, and as emphasized by Hannah in the opening of this workshop, we stress that guidelines should be produced with a concrete implementation plan. This implementation plan will allow AMS to better operationalize the contents of the outputs. In addition, workable and suitable results-based monitoring, evaluation, and learning strategy need to be developed to assess regularly how these guidelines are being used. In terms of the adoption rollout of these guidelines, the review has noted that ASEC and AMS should move towards more strategic policy making when responding to ASEAN-wide issues by breaking down silos and engaging with different subsectors. It is also noted that the importance of advocating for more frequent intersectoral dialogue to bring together relevant ASEAN sectoral bodies to talk about climate change. These 2 important recommendations point to an important challenge on how to develop CSA guidelines that could translate and resonate into national policies and programs. Those reviews and recommendations are important considerations as we move forward in our development for CSA Volume 3 and its corresponding implementation strategies. Based on those, we will present later in this workshop 2 things that could help us address these reviews and recommendations including these 5 assessments for CSA technologies and practices prioritization. Given all these technologies from volumes 1 and 2 and others that we might include further, we now need to have a tangible approach on which ones to select and prioritize for implementation in our respective communities. I will explain in better details this assessment in a presentation later. And once we have prioritized and selected the most relevant, useful, and feasible CSA technologies and practices, the next step really is on how to operationalize and implement CSA. Also in the presentation later, I will discuss the strategies of the Philippines towards transforming agriculture-rural development under climate change conditions. I believe this could provide us with important insights as we think about our strategies for the CSAs. This slide shows you the 7 umbrella strategies we adopted and example activities for each. And for further reading, you may check these publications that we published. And you know, Dr. Leopoldo Sebastian is our co-author of this compendium. So the link is shown in the screen. I guess that's all for my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Labios, for this very good summary of the process of how the Volume 1 and Volume 2 came into life. And also thank you for this summary of the recommendations that have been developed by GIZ in cooperation with the Stockholm Environment Institute based on a desk research and also based on interviews with some key stakeholders who have been involved in the development of the CSA guidelines Volume 1 and 2. So with this, we would like to open the floor for some joint discussions, some reflections on the CSA guidelines Volume 1 and 2. And I would like to invite Dr. Petris Orencio from CIRCA to guide us through this discussion round.
Hannah, Doc Ped does just his first job, so I will take over with you.
Okay. Okay. Go ahead then.
Okay. For this discussion, we would like to reflect on 2 things. As I presented on the process and output of developing CSA guidelines, reflecting on the existing CSA guidelines Volume 1 and 2 that was presented earlier, how they have been developed and applied, what should be maintained from those guidelines, what could be improved that would lead to development and implementation of national policies and programs. And secondly, on the adoption rollout of CSA guidelines, we would like to get a discussion on what implementation strategies should be included in CSA 3 other than what I have presented. So that's what we would like to have for this discussion. So the table is now open for any contribution from the members.
I can see from the list of participants in this meeting that there are quite a number of people attending this meeting who were involved in developing these guidelines. And I can already see one of them raising their hands, 2 of them. So please, Dr. Maxim, please.
Thank you very much that is good for we have the guideline too. Because me is the one to involve for develop a guideline 1 and guideline 2, and what in practical recently we are go beyond that. So that of course they highlight specific on right or whatever, but now you see according to practical in Cambodia, we go beyond that related to the CSA. So like stress tolerant variety in general, cultural practices, for example, like seed driller, that is for integrated soil nutrient management, conservation of agriculture, and integrated nutrient management or water management, not only wet and dry for rice, but we are focused on saving, saving water to improve water productivity and effectiveness. I mean, productivity and effectiveness of water use, like drip irrigation or whatever. Yeah, that is so what and also the other guideline provide like a tool, like including crop insurance or agriculture insurance. So what I would like to suggest is, yeah, of course, we put a specific guideline 1 or guideline 2, but we need to be put the CSA guideline should be yeah, what we put in for crop, for livestock, or for fishery, for example. That is one. Second is put the clear guideline for us. Guideline 1, what tool or what improvement. Guideline 2, guideline 3, guideline 4 to make consistent with other ASEAN guidelines, for example, like gender mainstreaming guideline, or like how to call ASEAN guideline for responsible investment for agriculture. That we provide clear, yeah, provide clear guideline, because you see, the CSA is not a technology. CSA as a approach, as a and provide, yeah, that is I'm not a challenge because I'm involved in developing 1 or 2 during that time. But now we need to be, yeah, we need to be upgrade or make clear in order for implementation in terms of like crop, like how to call crop management, like yeah, I said in before, what is a tool, what is like a stress tolerant variety, cultural practices, soil nutrient management, integrated pest management, water management. They provide a tool what is more how to call more profitable, more productivity and profitable, and resilient to the shock, particularly through the climate shock, and provision to mitigation adaptation of, yeah, climate change. So that is my my suggestion. But I support for develop. But we have to thinking about more, go beyond guideline 1 or guideline 2. Yeah,
Okay.
that is, yeah, that is my my note on this point. And we will I will see the guideline 3 look like, and then we will discuss about this. Thank you very much for give opportunity for me. Thank you.
Shall we collect a few more comments before you respond, maybe, or react to that, Dr. Labios?
Yeah, we could probably 1 or 2 because they might be the same.
Yeah. Actually, I'm pretty sure they will be interlinked or built up on each other. Kun Margaret, I see you raise your hand.
Yeah, and Dada there, I saw it.
Yeah, I see her too. So,
Okay.
but first Margaret and then Dada.
Yes,
Hi, Margaret.
Thank you, Hannah, for giving me the chance, the floor. And also thank you, Romeo, Dr. Romeo Labios, for a very comprehensive analysis of volumes 1 and 2, including your recommendation how we could improve it into volume 3. So volume 1 and 2, yes, it is a compilation of best practices. So that was done. In volume 3, I would like to see the real components of CSA, which if you are familiar with enhanced productivity, enhanced livelihood, and reduction of greenhouse gas, or talking about something like adaptation and mitigation practices. Now, for volume 3, as there are already global changes, and also now that we are already talking about food systems, so volume 3 may focus on resilient food systems and response to pandemics or environmental shocks. So I hope that this is be incorporated in the volume 3 to be more relevant recent in the time of global changes. So thank you also for GIZ for thinking of having a volume 3. So it's just that we try to be responsive to the global needs nowadays. Thank you.
And Dada, please.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and thank you for giving me the floor. I'm afraid I have to go very soon for another session at the Asia Pacific Climate Week. As most of you know, I think I know a lot in the room. And hi, Dr. Labios, good to see you again from the beginning. We have been responsible for the production of the first 2 volumes. So I just wanted to make a very quick comment on possibly 2 terms, adoption strategy and rollout plan, which I think is very ambitious and quite not necessary. Because as we speak, Dr. Maxun is very right in saying that CSA is an approach. And as we speak, when you say rollout, it means there's a starting point, and then you're just gonna roll it out. But the thing is, CSA has been happening even before we are speaking now, even before we produce the volume 1. And that's why the approach and the framework behind volume 1 and 2 is a compilation. There are many agencies, many sources, many stakeholders who are actually already implementing and have plans that none of us are also even can be aware of what their plans are for further implementation. So a rollout might not be, I would just suggest that a rollout strategy might not be applicable, because you shouldn't look at it that you are the start, that volume 3 is the start and you're just gonna roll it out, because there are many, many stakeholders involved in CSA. And that's why the approach taken by 1 and 2 is that it's really a reflection and a guidance to others who wanted to do it. And it's a reflection of current best practices that are being done. So I hope that volume 3 would not take the role of like a source or a beginning point, because then an adoption strategy, meaning that you are very new and people will just adopt, when in fact what we have are best practices. There are just so many already. And in fact, the creator of the term CSA is not in the room, which is the UN Food and Agriculture Agency. So, and regarding ideas for volume 3, the ASEAN-CRN has been collecting and hosting the UN Food System Dialogue, regional dialogues, and on Action Track 3, which is on innovation on resilient food systems. So we hope that some of the ideas coming from these dialogues can be reflected in volume 3. The collection has been undertaken, and we would gladly like to lend some of the ideas coming from there. And that's all for now. Thank you. Have a great workshop.
Dr. Labios, do you want to react or share thoughts or maybe ask follow-up questions?
Yeah, I think I noted those suggestions, and well, I think, yeah, we noted that these volumes 1 and 2, as mentioned by Dada and Margaret and Mr. So are only references. So that's why we would like to open this one. So in terms of, we understand that there are a lot of technologies and practices, and even in my presentation and later in the Philippine case, there's a lot. So what we would like to do now is really, we would like to focus on what strategy should we do in terms of prioritizing them. I think we all agree that since the developments of volume 1 and 2, and as mentioned by Dada, there's also about many issues about food systems and everything. I think the main issue here is with those numbers of these technologies and practices, what will be the prioritization strategy that we have to do in order that we could apply that in our outscaling activity, or if you don't like the word rollout, it's like an upscaling activity. So these are the things that we would like to get from you on what on the issues that we would like to put in volume 3. The implementation plan of the different CSA technologies and approaches that you have now, And if you really like to have suggested a detail of it, I think there's a lot of references already on the details of how to implement it. But of course, it is location specific. So for us, the key here is to prioritize and to develop a strategy, and at the same time, what policies at the national level should be included. I think those are the things that we would like to emphasize, and we would like to get your opinion on that one. Thank you. Maybe Ped is here. If Ped is already, so he could just add some more.
I
Okay,
don't think Dr. Ped is back yet, but okay, we have two more raised hands, and I would like to start with Alfie, please.
Okay, good morning, and thank you very much, Hannah, and for having me and providing the opportunity for the ASEAN Working Group on Social Forestry to join on this consultative meeting. And I'm really pleased to join here. And first of all, I would like to congratulate GIZ and also the ASEAN-CRN for the progress thus far. And also, I'm sorry for my lack knowledge regarding the CSA guidelines on Volume 1 and Volume 2 that already adopted. I would like to second the comment from Mr. Maxun that it will be really good to see that for the next guidelines that will incorporate other endorsed guidelines already. And related to the AWGSF on ASEAN Working Group on Social Forestry, I think there is we also produce guidelines on agroforestry that related with this CSA, because this is regarding the food security. And also, I would like to add that we also can we also think, because my knowledge that it's more on the product base, so perhaps that for the next guideline, how to incorporate the landscape approach as well. In the AWGSF, also we discussed about the training manual on the landscape approach. So we discussed about the food security, but we also consider the land as a landscape. So maybe that's and also that will be interesting to see that the CSA will also incorporate about the current COVID-19 situation. I think that's all that I would like to share. Thank you.
I did previously see the hand of Maxun, then it disappeared, and now it's on again. Dr. Maxun, would you mind if I first let Mr. Harris from Malaysia speak first, and then I go back to you, all right? Okay, Harris, please.
Thanks, Hannah. So maybe I can just share the progress in terms of Malaysia, especially in regards to Volume 1. It was first published in 2015. And it's now 5 years, and it's very much relevant to what's happening in Malaysia right now, because we very much involved in research, especially on stress-tolerant rice varieties and techniques such as alternate wetting and drying. And we can say it's already in the pipeline to suggest to the policymakers on those CSA practices. So Malaysia always work in the 5-year time frame. So we started every 5 years, and for example, the next 5 years development plan will started in 2021 and ended in 2025. So I would suggest in the next volume we could have included a bit on the time frame, because that's how the policy in Malaysia works. So it's very much implemented in my country. We have a 5 years development plan, which we conduct research as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Harris, and thanks a lot. And Dr. Maxun, you want to add something?
Thank you. And I just very quick. Yeah, I agree with both with Dada, but we need to put scope. And one, if we need to review the guideline 1 or guideline 2, what elements are still useful for us, like a stress-tolerant variety or some tool related to the soil nutrient management and integrated farming, we will consider and what. So, but you see, we are not go beyond, because when we're talking about food system, is very broad. So the climate smart is a tool for like we should consider with three components with a high taxation like a FAO. You see, one is sustainable increasing productivity and income. Second is adaptation and building resilience to the climate change. Third is reducing or removing green gas houses emission. Yeah, that is may include and the scope probably to call it in English in like a climate friendly related to the economic social environment. Yeah, that is but need to take out from the guideline 1 or guideline 2 and group it. Yeah, group it in guideline 1, guideline 2, guideline 3 as we prepare previous guideline, as I mentioned, like the guideline for responsible agriculture, forestry, food. Yeah, that is, we have a very clear guideline. Like guideline 1, what we're talking about the tool, like a CSA for implementation and review. The guideline 2, what is the capacity building related to that? Yeah. And I agree with you, like what is tool, like a crop insurance policy or whatever to support the climate change. Yeah, that is but we need to take from the guideline 1 or guideline 2 to group it as a guideline for us, because we in Cambodia, even we just started, but we go a bit beyond that. Yeah, for example, like now we are going to develop the crop insurance, action plan or whatever, and we set up the mechanism like all we have lead by Ministry Environment, Climate Change Committee, and then in the ministry we have a committee in order to look for the implementation such kind of climate smart agriculture. That is my for my suggestion, but we need to put limit scope. Yeah, limit scope to support food supply chain, because when we go along food system is because food system we may understand food supply chain and food environment. Yeah, that is go beyond. But the CSA as a tool to improve or to contribute food system for food supply chain. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Maxine. Dr. Labius, I will ask you to respond in a second. I see another raised hand, so we will take at least one more round of comments and questions. And I would also encourage participants representing different sectors or different policy fields, of course, also to provide your views. We already heard from social forestry, so if there are any additional perspectives maybe coming from the environmental policy area or from rural development. So of course, please feel free to join this discussion. And Dr. Labius, do you want to react?
Yes, as suggested by our participant, Ms. Alfie, I think agroforestry is also we're also considered in these guidelines, and the landscape approach, of course, as we are thinking now, and as presented by and as suggested by some of the participants, is instead of a component thing like focusing on variety only, focusing on nutrient management only, we are thinking of, if that's possible, put it in a systems approach, systems like what we are doing now. The popular one is the climate smart village. It's putting all together the different components that were made, we discussed. If you're talking about climate smart village in a lowland ecosystem, what are those? So this might be one approach that could be included, but that's only a suggestion. That depends only also to the group. And of course, the issue about this pandemic, and definitely that's one presentations that will be given by Dr. Ped later. If you can wait for that one. Thank you.
Thank you. So I see two more raised hands. I'm not sure if Harry's hands is still raised or raised again, but first let me give the floor to Mr. Chung from Vietnam.
I
Hello, good morning. I'm Trung from Kanta University, Climate Change Research Institute.
Hello, Dr. Trung.
Yeah,
Nice
very happy to see you.
A
Yeah.
good old friend.
Yes. Yeah. So so first of all, I would like to congratulate that we have the first two guidelines very successfully sharing the based understanding of CSA, and also have a kind of showing the good practices in CSA in the Southeast Asia country. We can learn a lot from the guidelines. I would like to have one short comment on the adopted rollout of CSA guideline number 3. So I think at the moment, all of us see that the climate change adaptation is under a kind of very dynamic and complex system of changing both external and internal environment, socio-economic, and even policy factors. So if every day is changing. Yeah? The pandemic also one of the thing that we consider. So I'm thinking of having where now is in the internet, and open sharing of the information. We can thinking of some kind of real-time web-based platform that to do we have a kind of living lab at a village where you can put in all type of information of land, soil, water, and practices of land use, and also apply technology to coping with climate change at a village, and we can put that in the platform that we can all share together. So each village we can build that kind of dynamic website. So then we call it integrated innovation knowledge system. We are doing in one community here in Vietnam, and I think it's helped to see the changing every time, and we can engage the expert and from our network to directly help the community. So it's a kind of living lab, living case study. It's not if you only write in a guideline and then after some time the situation changed already. So I think that we should have something that always updating, and we can very quickly respond to the changes. So our institute are willing to join and collaborate with you, especially for case study in the Mekong Delta. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I see one last raised hand, and then we need to close this first round of discussion. Dr. Aung, please.
Thank you very much. I have I will short quickly because my friend from Vietnam say the web-based development. So my point is also similar because the climate change and climate smart agricultural practices are a lot of practices. But another we have to concern is the different climates zone may have some challenges. For example, central dry zone may different the best practices, but flat row area may have some CSA best practices. That's why I would like to suggest creating the digital platform for the targeted people or targeted village or targeted region is the best and most effective. This will be integrated into volume 1 and 2 and also so on. So in our country also have the prioritization for the ADS development strategy. So we we put the one implementation strategy for promoting of the IT and information technology into the technological dissemination. For if we create a platform, digital platform for the targeted people or targeted region, we can send the relevant information, technology, financial information, market information, so and so on. So this is my point. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Aung. Any quick reactions before we move to the next presentation?
Yeah, I think we noted that one too, and we actually considered that one because of the digital age that we have now, and that will be presented later on in the strategies that I will present later on. So thank you for that suggestions, Dr. Trung and Dr. Ong.
Okay, great. That was a very fruitful first round of discussions. We'll have more discussions later on, but now let us move to the next presentation. And let me check. Dr. Pat, are you with us?
Everyone, let me share my insights on this topic about
Please, Dr. Pat, I just wanted to check if you're here. I will want to give you a proper introduction first. I was just not sure if you are there. So, Dr. Pat Chris Orencio is the program head of CIRCA's Research and Thought Leadership Department. He leads the center's agriculture and rural development research initiatives aimed at influencing policy directions, building research capacities, and conducting research activities in Southeast Asia. He has worked on different projects that dealt with grassroots development and capacity building related to urban planning, land and water management, climate change adaptation, and many other related topics. And he also collaborated with a lot of international organizations such as USAID, World Bank, USAID, and JICA. He holds a bachelor's degree in fisheries and 2 master's degrees in urban and regional planning, as well as 2 master's degrees, and in environmental science, and he also holds a PhD in environmental science. So, Dr. Pat Chris, please now enlighten us about the evolution and emergence of shocks and stresses related to climate change in the region.
Good morning, everyone. Let me share my insights on this topic about evolution and emergence of shocks and stresses related to climate change in Southeast Asia. Let me emphasize the need to adopt sustainable operations amidst the impacts to minimize risk and achieve resilience. In fact, many of the Southeast Asian nations are considered at risk to impact of climate change as per the latest World Risk Index report. The majority of these countries that are affected by climate change are developing countries. And when we refer to developing, the definitive factors would include income, growth, or economic performance. However, as we relate this growth to many underlying factors, we can find that there are significant factors that affect our daily lives, such as livelihood, food, or even natural resources. So in this slide, allow me to present this graph showing that the impact of climate change can range from bad to worse, depending on how large are the shifts in the climate systems. Crop yields, for instance, will alarmingly decrease in many areas in the region. We will also feel the effects of decreased water availability, and we'll hear of extensive damages to coral reefs, and there is the projected rising number of species to face extinction. There will be more intense storms, forest fires, droughts, flooding, and heat waves that will continue to happen. This leaves the question of what will happen in the future. Much of this, I think, will depend on how successful we are in limiting greenhouse gas emissions. For each of the assessment reports, we found that IPCC developed several scenarios of future emissions, and this also includes feedback loops and tipping points that hasten or slow down the occurrence of climate anomalies. This actually tests our capacities to adapt and become more adaptive to the challenge in the future. I would say that it is difficult to predict future conditions because they are contingent on too many variables, including the amount of greenhouse gas emissions. It is also difficult to predict climate scenarios because the processes are results of complex interactions between many different systems, and we don't fully understand these interactions. This uncertainty is actually what we call and sometimes referred to as risk. Definitely, we note that changes in temperature and the precipitation result to significant impacts. In this scenario model by an ADB paper that was published in 2017, we can observe the changes occurring in two future scenarios. They are presented in two different timelines, 2050 and 2100. The future scenarios are referred to as RCP 2.6, wherein projections are maintained between the 2 degrees Celsius level, and but on the right-hand side, you will find the results of the models under a business as usual scenario. On the left-hand side, the graph shows that summers will be 6 degrees higher than the baseline period. But a different story expected when we talk about absolute warming, because this may refer to natural variabilities, which is sometimes case-specific. For rainfall events, on the right-hand side of the slide, we can observe pronounced changes during wet and dry seasons. The former is actually happening in the months of June, July, and August, which are actually the period of the monsoons, and the latter at the months of December, January, and February. This will we'll experience increase in variability and decrease in rainfall towards the end of the century under a business as usual scenario. Impacts actually happen when the physical process meets the human systems. So the changes in temperature and the precipitation patterns, for instance, would result to events that will impact crop production. There will be areas affected by drought that will be degraded and make land less arable. There will also be areas where intense rains will damage crops, and there will be also some physical processes that have much immediate manifestations like tropical storms and floods, and they represent the changes in extremes. But of course, not all these changes are negative, and since some crop yields may still increase in some locations. I think more to understanding the impacts is to understand that there are also underlying risks, not limited to sustaining the crop production activities, but the overall functioning of the agri-food system. This may range from the shrinking of the food supply, thereby affecting food insecure areas, to economic and livelihood security, as well as further damage and loss to natural ecosystems. The risk, as we observe, has also been affected by other disruptions, such as this pandemic, for instance, that created supply and demand shocks that likewise affected the agri-food systems, thereby highlighting the need to become resilient. So as we described in the previous slides, there are seasonal shifts such as heat wave, stronger rainfall that happen over the years, and sea level rise that may be taking place over decades. And so the impacts of these events will appear over time. Also, based on observed climate data, the projection shows an increase in 5 degrees in temperature. And imagine how this increase would affect optimum crop production. Definitely, the result will be towards reduction as the supporting conditions go beyond the threshold levels for each crop varieties. For rice, the impact can be observed in the grain feeding, grain quality, and so on and so forth. There are also prolonged occurrences of events, such as salinity and drought that have affected Vietnam. This table shows the percentage of land affected by salinity intrusion and the corresponding yield in the Mekong Delta region for the past 4 decades. Salt water was estimated to intrude 30 to 40 kilometers of inland paddy fields, rendering large areas unsuitable for crop production. Significant mean yield reduction of less than or more than 25.8% was expected in high salinity risk areas. In a recent study by Tanyan et al., the difference in average seasonal yield in MRD between present, the year 2005 to 2016, and the future, meaning covering 2020 to 2050, could be around 0.12 tons per hectare and 0.41 tons per hectare for representative concentration pathways 4.5 and RCP 8.5 scenarios, respectively. It is actually expected as a result that this reduction in agriculture production will affect the livelihood of agriculture-dependent communities that in turn will aggravate food insecurities, especially the poor and vulnerable communities in the MDR. Globally, these crop losses will translate into food shortages and high food prices, resulting to lower competitiveness of the rice industry in Vietnam. So what should be undertaken? There should be, I think, necessary changes in agricultural practices, and this may emanate from the combination of various individual responses at the farm level, which are influenced by variations in natural resources, natural disaster and climate variability, rice seed, livelihood strategy, social demographic profile, pestilent insects, and social networks. Farmers must understand the negative effects of salinization and must develop individual responses at the farm level. This can be through experimentation and learning on the application of local traditional farming systems and improving the yield through application of fertilizers and switching from local rice varieties with long growth duration to high yield varieties with shorter growth duration. On the other hand, there should be adoption of technology such as the 41 new salinity tolerant and flash flooding varieties, along with the adjustment on the cropping calendar to avoid drought salinity intrusion cycles that would lead to increased rice production during autumn and winter seasons. At the macro and meso levels, an innovative system of integrated policy services, technology, human capital development, and social community engagement must be supported and strengthened. At the micro level, there should be adoption of good agricultural practices in growing rice to effectively respond to salinization and to ensure farm production is maximized. To operationalize the above recommendations at the farm level, a strategic wider adoption of good agricultural practices or GAP in cultivating rice in saline coastal environment can be adopted. This includes basically 7 steps, from the selection of rice varieties appropriate to cropping season and rice agrosystems, the use of seeds with high quality, application of seabed management and field preparation activities, water management to reduce the effects of salinity, fertilizer management to increase yield and keeping soil healthy, and timely harvesting of rice to reduce grain losses and ensuring grain quality. So as takeaways in this insight sharing, in order to cope with major challenges on how to feed a growing world population, how to reduce this world poverty in the world, how to manage ecosystem strategies, there should be adoption of these strategies both at the macro and micro levels. This will ensure that risks will be reduced and the system will be more resilient. So thank you very much.
Edited and modified based on what each group thought was appropriate for each technology and approach, as well as for the ecosystem. The CSA assessment tool was used to determine the identified technologies and approaches, productivity rate in the absence of biotic and abiotic stresses, resilience to resilience rate in the presence of biotic and abiotic stresses, and greenhouse gas emissions at rate as shown in this table. So this is an example of the exercise we did in the Philippines. We have these different technologies and approaches as we listed them in the compendium. And from there, the assessment using this tool was ranked accordingly. So in this case, for the assessment of the productivity, resilience, and emissions, the top three are site-specific nutrient management, alternate wetting and drying technology, and pallet check system. The next indicator is the implementation of feasibility, implementation feasibility, which determines whether the interventions is technically and fiscally, ethically, and administratively feasible. The top three interventions in the lowland irrigated systems for these indicators are the stress-tolerant rice varieties, the laser-controlled land leveling, and storage grain cooling, storage grain or post-harvest technologies. The next indicator, the next assessment is in terms of the adoption barriers. The adoption barriers determined the different external and external constraints that can affect the level of adoption of farmers and other stakeholders. So this is the example of the exercise we did, And from this adoption barriers indicator, the stress tolerant varieties, the laser controlled leveling, and grain storage or post-harvest management rank the top 3 technologies and approaches. The other is in terms of the incentive mechanisms, assessment of incentive mechanisms, and assessment of key implementation players. In terms of the incentive mechanism, it is a measure that motivates or encourages farmers and other stakeholders to adopt and replicate the CRA technologies and approaches. In terms of the key implementation players, on the other hand, it identified the respective roles and responsibilities of the different stakeholders in the dissemination of CSA technologies and approaches. And this is the summary of the assessment that we did. So stress-tolerant rice, polite check system, and rice duct system ranked the top 3 technologies and approaches under this indicator. In terms of the key institution players, or to scale out the technologies, the polite check system, the laser controlled leveling, and post-harvest are again the top 3 CSA technologies and practices that were ranked, the top 3 ranked in that category. So after the prioritization of most relevant, useful, and feasible CSA practices, the next step is on how to operationalize and implement CSA. The strategies of the Philippines towards transforming ARD under climate change conditions could provide us with important insights as we think about our strategies for the CSAs. Several transformative strategies are already well known and recommended in the Philippines, for example, but for various reasons had limited success in attaining the desired scale. So these are some of the suggested promotion and dissemination strategies of the technologies and approaches. One is the regional cooperation, development of information, education, and communication materials, resource mobilization, regional consolidation of CRA technologies and approaches, agricultural insurance, institutional sustainability, farmer field and business schools as social learning platforms, technology and asset management, identifying regional and farm level adoption action plans, and integration of land into climate change and adaptive planning. So this figure shows the proposed strategies to transform Philippine agriculture under climate change conditions. And these 7 strategies include implementing suitable CRA technologies and approaches through integrated clusters and landscape approaches. Second is empowering farmers and farmers organizations, and as mentioned a while ago, to go digital. And the 4th one is mainstreaming low emission development. The 5th one is improving access to finance. And the 6th one is enhancing social inclusion. And finally, educating the consumers and producers. These strategies are all connected with one another. Each strategy allows the farmers, the end users, and climate resilient technologies and approaches to participate in climate and agriculture-related discussions, improve the productivity in the farms, enhance their adaptive capacity against current and impending risks, and reduce their greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. So let me discuss it one by one. The strategy in implementing suitable CRA technologies and approaches through integrated clusters and landscape approaches should be evaluated for location specificity to determine how they meet the needs of the communities vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. These initiatives should cater to the needs of the community, of the target community, and to the overall agroecological context to which they can be applied. This can be achieved by mapping the various climate-related risks in the area. Other important activities related to this farm, mechanization and diversification of crops and livelihood, which all both offer adaptation and mitigation benefits. The other strategy is by empowering farmers and farmer organizations. Farmers should enhance their decision-making skills and bargaining power. This requires enabling the farmers to access relevant information such as prices of agricultural inputs and outputs in the market. A way to do this is through a farmer-to-farmer learning, especially among farmers' organizations. This is important so that farmers could realize that agriculture is a viable business that they can grow and sustain in the long run, or creating a sense of agripreneurship or agricultural entrepreneurship. Another learning entry for this is through farm business school. One of the participants mentioned about going digital. The Philippines should take advantage of the digital revolution, or the Southeast Asian member, or the AMS, should take advantage of the digital revolution to improve its competitiveness, adapt to climate change, access markets and services, attract more investments, and improve access to finance. Currently, there are several emerging agri-technologies, including the use of big data phenomenon, the Internet of Things, the blockchain technology, and this issue on agriculture 4.0. In terms of the mainstreaming the low emission development, another key strategy is the mainstreaming low emission development. We have to engage farmers on how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in their farms. For instance, the solar-powered irrigation systems, which supply water to agricultural lands through solar energy, is an important technology. However, we emphasize that this should be complemented with incentives and to other benefits to motivate the farmers. Climate financing schemes at all levels should be explored. Another important strategy to mobilize and realize these technologies and practices is through improved access to finance. For example, we could utilize national and international funding, such as the People's Survival Fund in the Philippines. Moreover, expanded private sector activity and public-private partnerships are keys to unlocking the potential of such innovative financing. The government should work with these financial institutions to develop credit and insurance products that cater to the needs of farmers and agripreneurs. Other things that should be explored should be innovative credit and insurance programs and financial literacy among farmers. The full potential of these strategies could only be realized when we enhance inclusion and in designing and implementation of these technologies and practices. These sectoral and gender-specific challenges should be considered through participatory approaches, dialogues, and youth agripreneurship. The potential contributions of these vulnerable sectors should be identified and integrated into climate change initiatives. Indigenous people communities can adapt to climate change with their traditional knowledge and practices. Women can participate in climate change initiatives through access to relevant resources. Excuse me. The youth may serve as intermediaries of climate information in their communities. And finally, the technologies and approaches should be evaluated for location specificity to determine how they meet the needs of the communities vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. These initiatives should cater to the needs of target community and to the overall agroecological context to which they can be applied. This can be achieved by mapping the various climate-related risks in the area, Other important activities related to this is farm mechanization and diversification of crops and livelihoods, which all both offer adaptation and mitigation benefits. So the other one is, oh, sorry, it is already. Okay. So for further readings, you may check this publication, and the link is shown in the screen. The next presentation is about the monitoring and evaluation, which is usually lacking in the CSA implementation. The Food and Agriculture Organization, in one of their publications, suggested a results-based framework that indicates how specific climate-smart agriculture practices are expected to be linked to intermediate variables at the output and outcome level, and ultimately lead to impact and improvements in terms of adaptation, mitigation, and food security. So the link of that publication is in the screen. In summary, the FAO results-based monitoring and evaluation suggests that evaluation involves gathering specific data relating to project indicators and processes and focuses on outcomes and impacts. The activities involved in monitoring and evaluation include setting project baselines, defining indicators, measuring process, and evaluating success and the problems encountered by climate-smart agriculture interventions at the end of the project. Monitoring and evaluations are initiated at the preparation stage in the project cycle and are closely linked with the overall climate-smart agriculture planning. And that's all for this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Labios. We have now some time for some questions and also comments to the two presentations we have heard so far. So just as a reminder, so we heard from Dr. Pat about the stresses that the Southeast Asian region is facing related to climate change, and he reflected about how this relates to CSA, as CSA is a means to respond to these stresses. And we heard from Dr. Labios, based on an example from the Philippines, how CSA can be strategically planned and what elements of what different sub-strategies are and how they're interlinked to planning CSA interventions, and he also highlighted the importance of monitoring and evaluation. So please, are there any questions and comments to these two presentations? Mr. Maxun, you beat everyone.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you. Thank you. I just make a clarification with the second presentation related to the CSA intervention. The indicator, yeah, of course, I just would like to see, you see, according to the, we have three components or three indicators as you highlighted. But I look, indicator one, you look for increasing productivity. Yeah, but we should put enhance productivity and income, because the income is also one indicator to resilient to the shock, like a climate shock. That is one. And second one related to the you put the using of climate risk. So that means include like adaptation or build resilient. Yeah, I just would like to clarify on this point. If two indicators cover adaptation or build resilient to reduce risk, is okay. Yeah, it included. Yeah, just would like to clarify. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your questions. Actually, yeah, it's included there. You will note that the three indicators is what is also being mentioned when we discuss climate-smart agriculture. And actually, this is based from that definitions and indicators. And you're right, the productivity, definitely will lead to enhanced income. Back to you, Hannah.
Yeah, I see that Phoebe Ling is raising her hand.
Hannah, and
Hi.
thank you, Dr. Romeo, for your presentation. I think it's very enlightening about the approaches, the systematic way you have assessed and look at the implementation of CSA. I have some questions for you. One of them is under the assessment of impact of your CSA interventions, you mentioned that one of the criteria indicator you put out there was emissions. So the emission was assessed by the farmer. Was it based on the farmer survey, or is something that was carried out by your a team to do the assessment about what is that? Because you put a figure to emissions, so I'm wondering how do you derive that figure? The other thing is, can you explain a bit more what is the Palay check system, because it seems to be something that is quite popular with your farmers as well. Maybe there is it something that was developed by the government and then introduced or extended to the farmers, or is developed by the academia? And it will be very useful if the slides are available to us, because there are a lot of references that we also could check out. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comments and suggestions. Yeah, I'll probably go with number 3. Definitely the management will share this presentation. Right, Hannah?
Certainly.
Okay, good. And for the second one, polite check system. Actually, it's good that we have participants here from the Philippine Rice Research Institute. Actually, it's from that institutions where this approach was came from. So if I could hear from our participants from Field Rice to expound this better, so we could also hear your voice here, if anybody from Field Rice. Okay. Oh, Deputy Director.
Wait, somebody's speaking up.
Yeah. The Deputy Director of Field Rice, Dr. Jimmy, please.
Yes, Dr. Rami, nice to see you.
Yeah.
And also all the participants. Yeah. So the Palay check system is actually composed of key checks from seed to seed. And this was developed locally for the Philippines condition. And this is an integrated crop management. So it's a system that the farmer can adapt based on the situation that he has in his field. So actually, the integrated crop management system will be very flexible depending on the condition. So it's a specific
Thank you, Director
Thanks.
Kilang, Director Jimmy, for that nice assistance in answering the questions. Yeah, we noted those suggestions. Definitely, some of the, let's say, evolution of pest. This was actually included in the design of in the discussions of volume 1 and 2, particularly in the crop insurance things, and well, actually in the national studies they are also included. And we also noted for your suggestion on DSR technology and clustering approach. Actually, the clustering approach is one of the strategies I mentioned in the 7 strategies. So thank you for that, Dr. Kilang. Back to you, Hannah.
Yes, I would like to take one more comment and question before we move on. I see a raised hand from Mr. or Mrs. Sutapak.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I am Sutapak Panpapai. I'm from SOM IDPE Thailand, Ministry of Interior. So the first of all, I would like to thank you to invite us to join this special session. I have 2 issues that would like to share with all of you. Have the implement in the Thailand national level we have the National Committee on Rural Development and Poverty Eradication. So our ministry by the permanent secretary is the chair of the committee, and then include with the Line Ministry and also the Ministry of Agriculture and Cooperative Thailand also join with this committee. And for regarding to the COVID-19 situation, I observed that in Thailand have a lot of new smart farmer because I think because of the COVID-19 is impact to the economics, right? And a lot of entrepreneur in Thailand, sometimes they have to stop temporarily stop to hiring their employee, and then a lot of people is go back their homes in the province, in the rural and community area, and some of them have their own
Okay, so this is, you've seen this earlier and as presented by Dr. Romy. In the breakout room session, we'll be discussing basically three major topics. So first, following the strategies that were earlier presented, we'll be looking at them and determining at the country level what do you think would be the most relevant given the emerging shocks and stresses. And are there any other strategies that you think that is not included in this framework that can also be included given the differences and similarities according to the context of your country's adoption of the CSA. On the other hand, we'll be looking at the factors and as well as the factors that hinder as well as the facilitate the implementation of the strategies in your country. Okay, next slide, please. So we have already prepared here a guide template that will be used by the facilitator as well as the documenter. You've seen this earlier. We just provided 3 additional columns after the strategy and the example activities. This will serve as a guide, but of course you can go beyond this and you may identify other activities and from there identifying factors that are hindering or facilitating the implementation of the strategies. So that's all, I guess. We'll now be requesting our technical team to bring us now to our designated breakout rooms, and we'll be happy to hear from you later about the results of your discussions. Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. So let's start with the report back. I would like to ask all the facilitators to limit to maximum 5 minutes, just highlight like some key points that you took out of the discussion. But of course, don't worry, nothing will be lost. Everything that was said in the groups will be documented and it will be used for further working on this, on the concept, on the outline of Volume 3 and the implementation strategy of the CSA guidelines. I don't want to give the word to myself immediately because I was moderating Group 1. So we start from Group 4. Who moderated Group 4? I think it was Sarah, no?
Right. Oh, okay. Apparently I have one. Right. So good day, everyone. Greetings from Group 4. I'm Zara from Climate Smart Land Use in ASEAN. We would like to share with you some highlights of our discussion in Group 4. I believe there are going to be some converging points that will be shared also with other groups. But initially, thanks to Ms. B. Ling from Singapore, we started the discussion by having a common understanding of what climate smart agriculture is that we are talking about, the coverage of it, that we are aiming to cater both mitigation and adaptation aspects of climate change and other shocks, such as the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, with measures that allow farmers, business, and communities to be resilient in facing them. Yeah, and so Dr. Trung, if could go back, yeah, thank you. Actually, Pak Haris from Malaysia pointed out some priorities that Malaysia shares in ensuring low methane emissions and mapping of crop suitability as part of Malaysia's strategic measures in implementing suitable climate smart agriculture. Yep. And so there are also there's also a reminder from Dr. Trung from Kanto University that there is a need to work on stepwise approach in introducing an integrated approach of climate smart agriculture to this, ever-changing landscape of social and economic dynamic, to consider the changes and their impacts on the resilience of the communities once we introduce a certain approach. And also not to forget to engage the local business sectors, that as they are the main pillar of supply inputs and main users of the technology. Building on this socio-economic aspect, if we could go next to the other slide, Miss Donna.
Yes.
We actually touched quite a lot on how to empower farmers, farming families, and farmer organizations. Our colleagues from Singapore mentioned that in implementing suitable climate smart agriculture technologies and practices, some importance really need to be given to improve access to the existing knowledge and technologies. So for our farmers to know what are the existing practices out there, and to allow people to be aware of also some community practices and technologies that may help the farmers to be able to select which suitable approaches or technology they should be focusing on. And so there are also some other elaborative inputs from our colleagues from Indonesia and Malaysia regarding how they are using this farmer learning platform, and also organizations to disseminate this good practices that the government are trying to replicate in the country. If we could go on to the next slide, there are some identified facilitating factors and hindering factors once a technology, climate smart technologies is trying to be promoted by the government. In the case of some technologies, as part of the Agriculture 4.0, there are still some hindering factors in regard to the cost of the technology, and also the stable internet connection that actually would allow more farmers and communities to access this tools or Internet of Things that are available and are actually being promoted by the central government. Next, I believe we have also some other echoing points by our colleagues from Malaysia that mention that the issue of limited budget, limited access, internet access is kind of hindering the opportunity for wider public to implement some climate smart agriculture technologies. I guess it is impossible indeed to cover the depth and width of the discussion on various aspects of climate smart agriculture implementation within such a period of time, and so we may want to go back to all interesting points later on, I believe. So that is all from Group 4. Thank you. Back to you again.
Thanks a lot, Sarah. I would suggest we go through all groups before we have a little bit of Q&A and comments later on. So please, if you have any comments, additions, please share that with us later on. So Dr. Pat, do you want to continue with your group, please?
Hi, Ms. Hannah. I will be presenting on behalf of the third group.
Okay.
So I would be Perfect. So yeah, I'm Elson, everyone. I'm part of the third group. I was documenting with the third group. So our group was made up of our wonderful colleagues from Thailand, Cambodia, and Lao PDR. So it was quite a very fruitful discussion, but I guess in a nutshell, the summary of it was that our participants were very amenable and they quite agree with the current contents of the Philippine strategies for transformation under climate change. So I guess the strategies resonate a lot with our participants. However, we also were able to discuss additional examples for each of for the different strategies that were already identified in the framework. Like for example, in the Go Digital, there was quite a discussion on, for example, in Cambodia, on the use of remote sensing, and as well as maximizing the related data management, analytics, and accuracy aspects in terms of managing digital data in CSAs. And for example, in the mainstream low emission development, there were quite interesting proposed additional activities, such as this case of payment for ecosystem services. Like, how could we position CSA as ecosystem provider and actually monetize all these ecosystem services, such as climate change adaptation and mitigation services that it provides, and as well as suggestions for carbon credit on how we could frame CSA under the carbon credit discussions. And then there was also quite a discussion on how other activities in improving finance to access, for example. Like, for example, our colleague from Cambodia highlighted how, like maybe we could have an enabling framework in terms of finances, and as well as really strengthening that enabling environment for public-private partnership. And then we have our colleagues from Thailand who highlighted, really to enhance collaboration among young people, especially in the livestock industry. And we have proposed additional activities in terms of educating consumers and producers. For example, really question of how do we increase the awareness so that, especially by the younger generations, and really prepare them of their own option to respond to these shocks and stresses of climate change, and as well as this suggestion on certification. Example is at the Sustainable Rice platform, like how could we maximize certification for CSA products and outputs. So in terms of additional proposed strategies, there were really two that were discussed, and that's really the monitoring and evaluation. Like, how could we monitor and evaluate CSA adoption and promotion and implementation in the AMS? And this very interesting comment on where would the policy and governance, like in that framework there, in the Philippine strategies, where would the integration of policy and governance come in, so we can identify actions for climate smart agriculture. And this just shows you the different cross-cutting facilitating and the cross-cutting hindering factors that were discussed. So for example, a cross-cutting facilitating factor is the fact that there are already related practices that are already being implemented. So really trying to adopt and implement these strategies would have already its own entry point, already own leeway, because there are already those that are being practiced in the countries. But we see that there are actually more hindering factors, such as do we have the data available, or especially for the digitalization, and then the issue of land tenure, and as well as this repeating and I guess a very regular issue on how do we downscale the investments to our farmers. So yeah, that's just it from our side, from the third group. So thank you so much, Ms. Hannah.
Thanks a lot, Elson. So group number 2, Dr. Labios, that was your group, I believe.
Okay, so in group 2, our facilitator is Dr. Okay, in group 2, our facilitator is Dr. Robbie Labios, and I was the one who was instructed to document the activities from Myanmar. So under this, Under the umbrella strategy for implementing suitable CRA technologies and practices through integrated clusters and landscapes, there are some additional activities that they identified, and one of this is the provision of subsidies for farmers during transition period, specifically during the pandemic period or to normalcy. The facilitating factors that they identified are land consolidation in national level approach, provision of government program for farm mechanization that can be adopted by farmers, and another one is the linkages cooperation with private suppliers of farm mechanization and banks. They also identified the establishment of village seed banks through diversification of crops and livelihoods, and the design appropriate for CSA technology in diverse agro ecosystem. And in facilitating these factors, there are also hindering factors that they identified in this. So for this one, for the land consolidation, they identified that negotiation with farmers to agree with land consolidation, specifically farmers' acceptance in this kind of activity, is one of the hindering factors. Another one, under farm mechanization, they also identified the lack of investment support in the termination of market-led products and quality improvement. For the design of the appropriate CSA technology in diverse agro ecosystem, they identified the technology and knowledge transfer to selected agro-system as one of the hindering factors. For another strategy on empowering farmers, farming families, and farmer organizations, one of the identified facilitating factors is the establishment of knowledge centers, just like what they had in YAU, the Climate Smart Agriculture Center, and also the provision of investments for this kind of knowledge centers. And what they saw as a hindering factor in establishing these knowledge centers is the reluctance of farmers to join farmer organizations in Myanmar. Under Go Digital, some of the facilitating factors they identify for Myanmar is the human resource development, the high-speed internet connection, and the mobile application for weather and crop production services. However, there is also an absence of unified service provider platform for this kind of info technology, and they also have limited internet speed in several marginal areas. For the mainstream low emission development, one of the facilitating factors they identified in Myanmar is the policy development for activities under MLE development, strengthen the implementation of policy on low emission technologies and practices, and development of agroforestry roadmap. But there is also an insufficient budget for policy development in terms of, for example, a policy on importation for farm machineries that could contribute to low emission. Another one is the improved access to finance. There is this creation of awareness program by finance institutions about private banking systems and lending facilities for farmers and farming families. Another one is the contract farming. But in terms of this creation of awareness programs, they consider agriculture as business is risky in terms of investment. There is also a less financing in more fragile and risk areas. Another one is the enhanced social inclusion. There must be enhancing the program on farmers association and organizations. And for this, one of the hindering factors they consider is the provision of incentives in organizing farmer associations. And under the umbrella strategy of educate the consumers and producers, the facilitating factors that they identified are development of baseline information as basis for planning and program development, the promotion of their traditional or ethnic, I couldn't see okay, the word file again. Promotion of traditional and ethnic healthy food, and the improving market and information system. So that's all from Group 2. From the Myanmar group. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that would leave group 4 at the end. I'm sorry, I'm not going to share with you the table because that is very much work in progress yet, and it would be confusing to share it at that stage. So I will just highlight some of the key points that have been made during our discussions. It was an all Filipino group, so we got some more insights about implementation strategies in the Philippines. So we started off by discussing about the topic of digitalization, and there was the notion that it is of course realized that digitalization is becoming more and more important well, generally speaking, but definitely in the agriculture sector, but that there is a lack of understanding of what technologies are available and how these can be applied in the agriculture sector. That specifically, I guess, relates to farmers and small scale enterprises. So there is a need to provide some basic understanding and clarity here, and start introducing more knowledge and access to technologies in terms of digitalization. Then several times our Filipino colleagues mentioned the farm clustering approach, which is a specific strategy that is currently being piloted in the Philippines, and that holds some promising perspectives for improving farmers' capacity, improving productivity, access to markets, and so forth. So that would be an example for a strategy that would go under empowering farmers. Then we talked about general barriers that farmers and companies face, and well, generally speaking, and that applies really to several of the strategies that have been presented, that there is still a need to create more good test cases, more good use cases, and really analyze and communicate why these are good cases and what benefits they bring to the stakeholders involved. Another general, more cross-cutting barrier that was mentioned is that it is needed to make strategies like the ones that have been discussed in this meeting would need to become more operational. Stakeholders need to understand better what they should do. They need to be broken down into step-by-step guidance and really make them operational for the stakeholders. We did discuss about the perspective of consumers for a while. So how can consumers drive the application of CSA approaches? And it was highlighted that the role of consumers is very much linked to demography, because if you have a lot of rather poor people that are consuming the agricultural products, then generally the limiting factor here is always price. That will always be the key criteria under which they decide what products to buy. So really the question is, how can CSA products be recognized, CSA source products be recognized and taken up by consumers? One strategy that was mentioned here was maybe labeling approaches, but also is there maybe a link between climate smart source products and quality, because quality is of course also a factor that would convince consumers to buy certain products. Then we discussed quite a while about financing. It was generally said, well, that funds are available at different sources, but access to funds, especially for farmers, is often an issue. A disconnect was stated between farmers and banks, and there are, as a limiting factor, there were several types of risk cited that limit access to capital for farmers. Well, firstly, generally speaking, the risks for banks that loans are not being repaid. For farmers, there is a risk involved that they need first to invest in testing new technologies where the return is not really clear to them. So they would need strategies to mitigate these financial risks for themselves. Also, there's a risk of crop failure when natural disasters hit, for example. As strategies to improve access to finance, it was insurance schemes were mentioned that are already being applied in the Philippines, and I believe also in other areas of the region or many countries in this world. So investing into insurance solutions is one of the strategies. There was also a concrete approach, a concrete example mentioned from social forestry, from the social forestry area in the Philippines, where they facilitated or where they implemented an approach that helps to link farmers with banks and also provides farmers access to insurance. It was also in context of finance mentioned that farmers need to increase their capacity how to manage funds. So it's not only about accessing the money, but also how to manage funds better. Another limiting factor that applies to the uptake of CSA technologies and approaches is that there is still a lack of understanding when it comes to what benefits CSA practices bring. So also here more information and more concrete examples would be needed to convince farmers or SMEs to switch to more climate-friendly and resilient practices. At the end, we discussed a little bit about data, availability of data and information, and it was highlighted that in the Philippines there are already attempts to localize data and information so that farmers in the respective provinces receive the information that they need, also in a format that is suitable for them, and also to accompany this with decision-making tools that can be applied. And there's, of course, also a strong link to the topic of digitalization. It was also highlighted, I would also say, as more of a cross-cutting strategy, really, that it is important to establish and improve cooperation between different kinds of institutions and stakeholders. So really to promote convergence of institutions in order to promote CSA, broad CSA rollout and application, involving different stakeholder groups and also benefiting different stakeholders that are working along the agriculture supply chains. And last but not least, a topic that was mentioned is the effect of limited mobility that we see during the pandemic, that this is also something that would need to be considered, that has impacts on agriculture value chains and that would need to be considered in strategies. So not as systematic as the other groups have presented it, but we will, of course, also further work on the details and fill out that table for the documentation. With this, I would like to invite you to add. Has anything been forgotten? Any key point you would like to stress or correction that you would like to make?
Hello, madam.
Yeah. Yeah. Dr.
I
Watson?
just you see, I just the group I think is maybe I confused or what missing about the enabling framework or enabling environment. One missing is a mainstreaming of CSA in existing policy or in policy and program within regional or national or community level. That is I seem to be missing on that. If we are not put it in the policy or in the implementing program or project, the strategy only in the paper. That is one thing for need to be considered related to the mainstreaming of CSA in national policy or program or project implementation. Yeah, thank you.
Noted. Any further quick additions, because we are already running a bit out of time? I see Fabiling, you are raising your hand.
Thanks, Sana. So I just wanted to comment that what you have summarized in group 1 is very good. It's very comprehensive. I just wanted to highlight the points which I am in agreement with. Like example is you need more use cases. you need more on the ground feedback on what are the successful cases in terms of the CSA interventions. I think these are important areas to take into account. Then we can talk about implementation framework that is at a bigger scale or framework approach. The other thing I have is this thing about the farm clustering approach, because you shared that Philippines there was a lot of discussions on this. What sort of farm clustering are you talking about? Are you talking about integrated form of farming where you put let's say a livestock farm next to a vegetable growing farm so that you could have synergies? So these are the areas that I think we need to spend some time to discuss. I mean, this first consultation has been very useful. I have heard from some of our colleagues, let's say from Indonesia, from I think it was Thailand or Vietnam, talking about salinity management, and then from Indonesian colleagues, Ada was sharing about soil sensors. So I think there are valuable information that other colleagues are already implementing in their countries on the ground and getting some success. So whether there could be other platforms, or ASEAN-CRN will organize some platforms for colleagues to share about these success cases. Yeah, over. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for raising this suggestion, Fibiling, and that is definitely well noted and will definitely be taken up in our other work for CRN, but also that, of course, is a shout out to other CRN members and supporters, right, to help us not only leave it with that discussion here in this workshop and in the next consultation workshop when it comes to the guidelines, but also to further provide other dialogue and knowledge sharing platforms across the region. But yeah, definitely well noted. Anyone else who wants to raise something? Anything forgotten, misinterpreted? Please, of course, also feel free at any time to reach out to me or to our CIRCA team. I will show the contact details in the end, and they will also be disseminated to you with the presentation. So, of course, we are very grateful for any further comments, any further thoughts, corrections at any point in time. So, but with a view on the time, I would suggest we move forward to the closing. Well, it was a very rich discussion, and also like Fibiling just highlighted, so many different examples came up, and CSA is a wide field. So there are a lot of strategies, different practices, technologies, aspects, stakeholders to consider. So I'm not going to attempt to summarize everything that has been brought up here, but please definitely be aware that everything that you said is well noted. We will also certainly follow up on some references that you have given to us. But what I took, at least personally, was that I was very happy to hear that several of you highlighted or echoed a different or a similar line of thinking. I think that we also have with this approach towards the Volume 3 and in the implementation framework. And that means a more systematic approach, or more systems perspective approach to the topic of CSA, looking more in at the level of overarching strategies and elaborating what aspects and sub-strategies exist and need to be considered in moving forward with CSA in a more systemic way. Of course, recognizing that CSA has been implemented since decades, long before even the concept of CSA has been recognized by the international community. Of course, countries and local stakeholders have been implementing climate-friendly and climate-resilient practices. So that is definitely well considered. What we really want to do is to building on that, on this rich source of information and these rich experiences, to look what is really successful, what is innovative, what is maybe new, what has developed in the past years, and also to really think about what strategies are needed to upscale those many good examples that exist throughout the region. So I guess that is our objective with this endeavor, and that is what we will keep in mind throughout the process. Thanks a lot again for all your inputs. Before I will give an outlook on how we are going to continue with this process, I would also give the chance to my colleague from the ASEAN Secretariat, Dian Sukmajaya, to also provide some of his reflections on this workshop. Dian.
Thank you, Hannah, and colleague from CRK for facilitating this first consultation workshop on developing of the ASEAN CSA guideline and implementation framework, volume 3. I have been noticed and observing since this morning that indeed now most ASEAN member state and also colleague has a good idea and capture where we are now in terms of CSA guideline implementation, which we have already volume 1 and 2. That covering several issues like agricultural insurance, integrated farming, and also stress tolerance, variance, and everything. I hope that the CRK, also our consultant, can also identify based on the discussion what are the gaps of implementation and what are the needs of ASEAN member states, as reflected by colleagues from Cambodia and Singapore as well. There should be perhaps enabling environment, enabling condition in mainstreaming CSA policy at the regional and national level. I think this is a good and important point for the regional cooperation related to the climate smart agriculture implementation or practices. And also more cases, best practices, successful story on CSA implementation might be important to also steer us toward what will be the right recommendation for the senior official for ASEAN member state to move forward in strengthening climate smart agriculture, including what are really the area that need to be focused on. And I also learned that the participants express their support, also interest to have more practical guidelines at the regional level. Most of them during the breakout group session, I joined the group 4. They express and share the best practices, also some input related based on the country's experience. I think there are similarity and also common ground on CSA practices that can be leveled up to regional. As such, it will also accelerate and support CSA practices in ASEAN member states. So the next will be the challenge for our colleague from CRK to identify what really regional climate smart agriculture strategy that is necessary to improve CSA practices implementation, addressing policy development, the need on capacity building, based on example of good and best practices CSA implementation in the country, and also promoting this CSA at the ground level. As I understand that there is also might be gap understanding between the national, the official at the national level and farmers in the ground. So I think those just my observation, and thank you for the ASEAN GIZ CSLU to support this exercise, and also colleague from CRK, active participation from ASEAN member state, as well as all facilitators during this first consultation workshop. We do hope to get the output that can be considered, and ownership is by ASEAN member states. So we will facilitate as usual the approval and also feedback from ATWGARD and perhaps relevant sectoral working group that might be as as this also cut across the sectors to get their feedback, and lastly to finalize and also endorsed by the SOM-AMAF accordingly. With that, Hannah, back to you, and thank you very much again to all of you.
Thanks a lot, Dian. So let me leave you with a little outlook on how this process is going to continue. Next slide, yes. So this is the very first step, right? So this consultation meeting is now giving us a lot of food for thought, what this could mean for really designing, starting to conceptualize what the volume 3 and the implementation strategy can look like. Well, first of all, we will of course circulate the documentation of this meeting. As I said, please feel free to provide your thoughts, comments, corrections at any time. Don't hesitate to get in touch. Our CIRCA colleagues will continue with their research. They will do work based on desk review and maybe other assessment methodologies as they seem fit, like surveys and interviews, to gather more information, get more insights on the examples that you shared and the different aspects that we discussed. They will prepare an outline for the volume 3 and the implementation strategy, and this will be shared with you, with the ASEAN member states and selected experts via the sectoral bodies, just like this invitation. We will have a second consultation that will happen before the second consultation workshop. So then we will have in September a second consultation workshop that will discuss more concretely about the suggested outline for these documents and look a little bit more into concrete content of these guidelines. Then, based on the outputs of this consultation workshop, CIRCA will continue to work on the draft 0 version of these documents, so actually putting flesh on the bones. We will again facilitate, with the help of ASEC, a round of review, and in the end the documents, as they will be the let's say publisher of this document, will be ASEAN-CRN. The final endorsement will come from ASEAN-CRN and then finally through ATWGARD. And then we hope that we will be able to submit the final draft for endorsement to SOM-AMAF. Hopefully in November. Let's see if we can meet this timeline. So that is our plan for now. You will hear from us again according to this plan. Hope to see you again for our second consultation workshop and also for other events that we are planning under the roof of ASEAN-CRN. Pat, Doc Labius, sorry, I'm switching to German now, so it's really time to finish off this workshop. Pat, Dr. Romy, anything you want to add besides saying thank you and goodbye?
Nothing on my end. Thank you very much.
Me too. We'll just continue discussing after this meeting. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay. Thanks a lot to all of you. Here you can see the email addresses, how you can reach us. And hope to see you again soon. Stay healthy.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Goodbye.